My parents forbade me from studying art and forced me into medicine to follow them, until my $2 million painting hung in their hospital and shattered their pride. I never wanted to become a doctor. That might sound strange to say, especially while wearing the white coat, the symbol of a profession seen as sacred and admirable, but it's the truth. To me, medicine felt like a gilded cage, glamorous, full of expectations, but it trapped my soul for years. I'm Susan Hartley, the only daughter of 2 top surgeons at Boston General, a hospital they've dedicated their lives to. To everyone else, I'm Dr. Hartley, the brilliant daughter carrying on the family legacy, always smiling in graduation photos, new medical center openings, and annual healthcare galas. But behind that polished exterior, I live another life, one my family has no idea about. In the quiet world of art, I am Celeste Gray, a name unknown just a few years ago, but now one of the most sought-after contemporary artists in New York. My paintings hang in Manhattan's prestigious galleries, with pieces auctioned for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The irony is, no one knows that Celeste Gray and Dr. Susan Hartley are the same person. This morning, standing in the grand lobby of Boston General, freshly renovated for the new specialty care wing, I felt the cruel irony of fate sharper than ever. The new center launched its Healing Through Art initiative, and right there on the main wall was my latest painting. A vibrant abstract piece pulsing with life, like a heart mid-beat. Signed Gray, it went for $1,800,000. The person who signed off on the budget for that piece was my mother. She stood next to me, tilting her head with a puzzled expression. "I don't understand modern art," she muttered, lips pursed. "Just messy streaks of color. Almost $2 million for this? What was the hospital board thinking?" I gave a strained smile, trying to keep my voice calm. "Maybe they wanted to add some warmth to a space that feels too sterile," I said. My father arrived, his white coat crisp, holding a thick patient file. "Well, at least it makes this place look less like a morgue," he muttered, then turned to me. "Still, I think they should have spent that money on upgrading the MRI machines." I bit my lip, hiding my reaction. If they knew those messy streaks came from the sleepless nights I spent sneaking away from shifts to paint, or that I used the money from that very piece to fund the pediatric wing, how would they look at me? That night, after a grueling 30-hour shift, I didn't go home. Instead, I slipped quietly into my tiny studio in Brooklyn, the only place I could truly breathe. No stethoscope, no mask, no suffocating expectations, just colors, light, and raw emotion. I turned on some music, took off my medical watch, slipped out of my white coat, and put on my paint-stained smock. On the easel was a half-finished canvas, deep reds tangled with purples, like a heart both crushed and screaming for freedom. I picked up my brush without thinking. Pain, pressure, all of it poured out in each stroke. Each line felt like it was ripping open my chest, revealing the part of me my parents never wanted to see, the desire to live for something real. But my story didn't start in a hospital or a New York gallery. It began 10 years ago, when I was 17, standing in our living room, hands trembling around an acceptance letter from the Rhode Island School of Design, facing my father's cold, cutting gaze. "You think we've sacrificed all these years for you just to become a painter?" he said, his voice low but sharp enough to make the china in the cabinet rattle. From that moment, I knew if I wanted to keep my family, I had to bury the most important part of myself. I remember that night vividly, the night I lost the right to choose for myself. It was a late spring evening in the Boston suburbs, with the last cherry blossoms still clinging to the trees in our front yard. I had just received the email confirming my full scholarship to RISD, one of my biggest dreams. My heart pounded as I opened the message, my hands shaking with excitement. Part of me wanted to scream with joy, the other part feared what would happen once I told my parents. I walked into the living room, letter in hand. My father was reading a medical journal, my mother jotting down notes for her conference schedule in San Francisco. I stood between them, took a deep breath, and held out the letter. "They gave me a full scholarship," I said, my voice shaking but my eyes full of hope. "They said they've never seen anyone with my color technique at 18. My father glanced at the letter for a second, then folded it calmly. "You're still going to Middleton Medical, just like we planned. This is just a teenage phase, Susan." But I'm not just drawing for fun anymore. I'm serious. They picked me from thousands. I want to study art. I want to work with people like me. People like you? My mother interrupted, her voice even and cold. You're the daughter of two of the top doctors in this city. You've been in pre-med for 3 years, perfect SAT science scores, accepted to Middleton. You are not some starving artist. I don't want to be a doctor, I whispered, feeling like I had just committed a sin. My father's eyes darkened. You think being an artist is easy? Look at your cousin Mark. He studied music composition, now he's working at a convenience store, living off handouts. That's the future you want? I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. I'm not Mark. I have passion. I have purpose. I can't just give that up. You're not giving up anything, my mother said coldly, ending the conversation. We've invested everything into your medical future. We don't invest in delusions. From that moment, my life veered down a path I never chose. I declined the scholarship, withdrew from RISD, and enrolled at Middleton Medical, the same school my parents once attended and now taught at. People called me the next Hartley legacy, proud and full of expectations with every word, but I felt suffocated. By day, I studied anatomy, cardiology, neurology, dissected soulless models. At night, once the world went quiet, I snuck off to a small attic studio in Dorchester, paid for with my own savings. That's where I became myself again. That's where I was Celeste Gray. I chose that name one winter night, snow falling beyond the worn glass window. Celeste, for the blue of the sky, gray, for the dull gray of the life I was trapped in. A name both dreamy and grounded, the perfect mask for my truth. I painted nonstop, as if each drop of color on the canvas could say what I never dared speak. I sent my work to an independent gallery in New York with a short email. I'm new, but my art will make you look twice. Don't ask for my real name, just call me Celeste Gray. I expected nothing, but a week later, I got a reply from the gallery owner, Ethan Blair. Your work has something unique, a sense of control without losing emotion. Send me 3 more pieces. Let's begin. And that was when the two worlds began to form. By day, I was a top medical student. By night, I became an anonymous artist, creating paintings critics described as raw, intuitive, as if each stroke was a heartbeat. That first year, I sold a painting for $25,000, my first income from art. I didn't spend a cent, I saved it as proof that the path I once dreamed of wasn't a fantasy. I painted more, lived less. During hospital shifts, I jotted down symptoms but also noticed expressions, hands, eyes, everything I would later translate onto canvas. They say art reflects life, but for me, art is the only place I'm truly alive. I don't know how long I can maintain this double life, but one thing I know for sure. If the truth ever comes out, I'll either lose my family or lose myself. And I wasn't sure if next time I would still choose to sacrifice. Throughout my years at Middleton Medical, I learned how to hide the brightest parts of myself behind a composed gait, days, and a meticulously professional demeanor. My schedule was so packed that an average person would have likely burned out. Classes from morning till evening, overnight shifts, and when the city finally slept, I would throw myself into a small studio just to let my heart breathe. Ironically, the more exhausted I was physically, the more intensely I painted. The stress, the pressure, the sleepless nights, all of it spilled out in layered strokes, full of emotion yet astonishingly controlled. That's when I began to realize medical knowledge didn't take me away from art. On the contrary, it gave me a completely different lens. I no longer painted only with emotion. I painted with deep anatomical understanding, muscle groups, blood vessels, bone structures. I infused them into my art like a symphony of science and instinct. My work started to develop a unique voice, not purely abstract, not fully realistic, but something in between, sharp as a scalpel yet soft as morning mist. In my second year of med school, after a 40-hour shift with no sleep, I painted a triptych in a single night. When I finished, I collapsed on the floor from exhaustion, paint still on my hands. Ethan, my gallery rep in New York, exhibited them in an independent art show. Within just 3 hours, the entire set was bought by a Swiss collector for $180,000. I couldn't believe it when Ethan called me during a dissection lab and simply said, "Congrats, Celeste, we've just entered a new level." I couldn't tell anyone. My classmates thought I was buried in textbooks. My professors saw me as a model student, and my parents texted proud messages every time I topped an exam. And me? I quietly wired that first big payment into a separate account, then went back to learning anatomy as if nothing had happened. After that, my artwork started gaining more attention. Critics began describing Celeste Gray with odd phrases: surgical brushstrokes, emotions structured through anatomy, an improbable fusion of science and soul. Ethan warned me never to reveal my identity. They love the mystery, a med student by day, a famous painter by night. No one will believe it's true, and that's exactly why they can't stop looking at your work. I guarded that secret like a flame, one that both sustained me and could burn everything down at any moment. And so the years passed. I studied and painted, healed and created. Sometimes I wondered how much of me was living authentically, but every time I stood in the OR or faced a blank canvas, I knew both of those people were me, not split, not fake. By my final year, I had sold over 24 pieces. One painting I made on Christmas night, while others gathered with family and I was on call in the ER, was auctioned at a Paris charity gala for a record $650,000. That painting, titled "Heartbeat in the Snow," depicted a real human heart, but instead of red, I used cold blues and shimmering silvers. By graduation, I had earned over $5 million, enough to buy a small island off the coast of Maine, something Ethan half joked about every time we planned Celeste's next getaway. "You know," he once said while we sipped coffee at a little cafe in Soho, "Celeste Gray could disappear any time, but Susan Hartley will always exist as a doctor." That's fascinating, I just smiled. Fascinating maybe, but also deeply conflicting. Every time my artwork made a magazine cover, I couldn't share it with friends. Every time a reporter requested an interview with Celeste Gray, I declined, saying she doesn't appear in public. That double life felt perfectly balanced, until the night Ethan called me near midnight, his voice buzzing with excitement and worry. "Celeste, do you know your latest piece was just chosen as the centerpiece for the Modern Art Museum's new exhibit? They want to hang it in the central atrium, but they're requesting the artist attend the opening." I froze. Part of me wanted to nod, step into the light, tell the world who I was. But the other part, the one that knew my parents would never forgive me, whispered, "Don't." I hadn't answered yet, but deep down, I knew my double life was approaching its greatest test, and maybe the moment everything I'd worked so hard to hide would unravel. I had no idea it would all begin to fall apart because of one painting. Last week, Boston General, the hospital where I had just completed my residency, hosted the grand opening of its new pediatric center, a project my parents had championed for nearly a decade. It was their pride, their legacy fulfilled, and I had been invited as a standout young physician. I arrived in my white coat, composed and polished as always, masking the storm inside. What I didn't expect was the painting displayed prominently in the main lobby, my latest work, breathing between the pauses, an abstract piece of chaotic, interwoven color streaks anchored by a single thin golden rhythm line running across it, a symbol of perseverance amidst disorder. I had submitted it to the gallery in New York under the name Celeste Gray just a month prior. Ethan said a medical organization bought it for $2 million. I didn't ask who, and now it was here, right in front of my parents. My mother tilted her head, frowning slightly. "I don't get it," she murmured. "Modern art feels jarring. Why put this right at the entrance? It makes patients uneasy, not calm." I tried to stay composed, but my fingers tightened around my coffee cup. My father stepped up beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes as cold as ever. He looked at the painting with near disdain. "Wish they'd spent that money on better ventilators for the ICU," he muttered. $2 million for a shapeless mess? Ridiculous. I turned away, my heart pounding, not with anger, but with the realization that the truth couldn't stay hidden much longer. Ethan was right. Things were moving faster than I'd imagined. Just 2 days later, I got a message from Ethan. "Urgent. New York Times is prepping a feature to expose Celeste Gray's real identity. Someone from the medical field leaked info. They noticed you're always off shift during her exhibits. You may need to act fast." I stared at the screen. Outside my window, the September sky was overcast, the wind rattling the old oak trees. I'd been so careful, switching shifts, hiding my work, never showing my face, but I underestimated the constant eyes in the hospital, the curiosity about the too quiet doctor. "Can we stop them?" I asked Ethan over the phone, my voice shaking. "No, unless you confirm or deny it. But you know denying won't work. You need to decide. And if you want, I can arrange for Celeste Gray to make her first public appearance at MoMA's opening." I sat on a park bench near the hospital. An elderly woman passed by, holding the hand of a little girl skipping along. Neither of them knew I was holding two lives together by the thinnest of threads, about to snap. I looked down at my hand, still stained with blue paint from last night's piece, silence in the curved line. I once believed secrecy was the only way to survive, but now, as everything threatened to come to light, I wondered if I told the truth on my own terms. Could it change everything? That evening, I sent an email to MoMA's organizers. Celeste Gray will appear at the upcoming exhibit opening. I will speak the truth. No anonymity, no hiding. Then I sent another message, for the first time inviting my parents to an art event. "Mom, Dad, Friday night, 7 p.m., MoMA. There's something I need to share. No long explanation, no plea, just one chance if they still wanted to listen." The next 3 days passed like a stretched wire. Rumors spread through the hospital. Art forums buzzed with Celeste Gray revealed. Some even placed bets on my real identity. I avoided social media, buried myself in work, but every time I walked past that painting in the lobby, I felt like I was seeing my own heart exposed. Friday night, the museum was packed. Soft lights glowed on a velvet curtain hiding the night's centerpiece, the woman of two worlds, a painting of a woman in a white coat, but her shadow behind her held a paintbrush. Colorful lines formed a heartbeat, some misaligned, as if that heart had once lost its rhythm, then found it again. I stood backstage. Outside were the press, colleagues, strangers, and my parents. Ethan gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "Your moment. Do it your way, Susan." I nodded and stepped into the light. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The room seemed to hold its breath. I stood backstage, gripping the hem of my ash-gray silk dress, hand-painted by me, each flower a year I had hidden in silence. The dress was light, but my feet felt like they were treading across clouds made of stone. Behind the black velvet curtain stood my parents, my colleagues who only knew me as Dr. Susan Hartley, the media, the critics, and Ethan, silently praying this wouldn't turn into chaos. The host stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, after years of anonymity, the artist Celeste Gray, whose works have redefined contemporary art, will appear before the public for the first time." I walked out. The spotlight swung toward me, blinding. The whispers swelled into waves. I heard soft gasps, camera shutters clicking like rainfall, and then I saw them. My father, standing tall, hands clasped behind his back, face expressionless. My mother, frozen in her seat, eyes wide, as if everything around her had turned to stone. I inhaled deeply, still holding the microphone I hadn't realized I'd picked up. "My name is Susan Hartley," I began, my voice steadier than I'd imagined, "and I am also Celeste Gray." The words rang out, sharp and irrevocable. The room went silent. The pause stretched, endless. Then the cameras erupted again, this time like a storm. A reporter shouted, "Aren't you a doctor?" Another called out, "You donated $2 million to Boston General. Is that your money?" I looked straight at my parents, as if the rest of the world had faded into fog. The painting in the main lobby of the pediatric center, the one you said made you uncomfortable, Mom, that was mine. I sold it under the name Celeste and used the money to fund the pediatric respiratory program. My mother still didn't react, her face pale, hands clenched around her purse. "And that wasn't the first time," I continued. "Over the past 4 years, I've quietly donated over $5 million to medical foundations, most of it for expanding the autism program here at Boston General." A soft gasp echoed from the left side of the room, then a few hesitant claps, and more followed. I turned to the host. He nodded. The large curtain behind me slowly rose, revealing the centerpiece of the exhibit, the woman of two worlds. The hall grew unusually quiet. The painting showed a woman standing between two realms, one side a sterile, glaring white surgical room, the other a vibrant, colorful studio. The woman wore a white coat but held a paintbrush in her hand. Her shadow behind her was both doctor and artist, two forms merged into one, inseparable. I heard my mother's breath hitch. She raised her hand to cover her mouth. My father's gaze flickered, his usually rigid shoulders slumped slightly, like something heavy had finally fallen away. When the applause rose again, this time thunderous and clear, I turned to Ethan. He smiled, eyes brighter than I'd ever seen. But I didn't care about the press or the praise. All I waited for was the reaction from the only two people I had ever longed to be seen by. My mother stood slowly, her eyes red-rimmed. I thought she'd be angry or disappointed, but she stopped in front of me and whispered, "Just loud enough for me to hear. So all those lines, you learned them from anatomy?" I nodded, and from emotions I wasn't allowed to show. She looked at me for a long time, then turning to the crowd, she spoke clearly. "I don't understand art, but I know I've never seen a painting that hurt my heart this deeply. And now I understand why." My father hadn't moved, but then he stepped forward. He didn't speak at first, just looked at the painting for a while, then turned to me. "We taught you to study detail, but you used that to see everything we missed." I didn't know if that was forgiveness, but I knew it was a beginning, and maybe, for the first time, they saw me, not just as a doctor, not just as an artist, but as a whole, real person. After that night, my life was never the same. The next day, the news exploded with headlines. "Young doctor is also million-dollar artist. Celeste Gray is Susan Hartley, daughter of Boston's top surgeons." At Boston General, colleagues looked at me differently, some with admiration, some with doubt. But I was used to that. Living between two worlds had never been easy. A few days later, when I returned for my first shift since going public, something unexpected happened. I passed the main lobby of the pediatric center, where Breathing Between the Pauses still hung proudly on the white stone wall. Below it, a new brass plaque had been added, engraved with, "A work by Dr. Susan Hartley, where art doesn't just heal hearts but touches souls." From May 22nd, it was doomed. I stood in front of it for a long time, until my father walked up, as quiet as ever. He didn't speak right away, just stared at the painting longer than I'd ever seen him look at anything not related to medicine. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough. "You painted a real human heart and kept its rhythm alive. That's no small feat." I turned to him, stunned. My father, who had always seen art as unrealistic, was now praising the feeling in my painting. He continued, more slowly, "I taught you to read the body's map, but you painted a map of emotions I never understood, and maybe I never wanted to." For the first time, I saw his eyes soften, as if every expectation, every pressure he had unknowingly placed on me was starting to lift. I didn't know what to say, just that something heavy inside me had finally been let go. That day, during a hospital board meeting, my father, the most respected voice in the room, stood up during a debate about whether the painting in the lobby should be auctioned off for a hospital fundraiser. "No," he said firmly, "we keep it, not just for its artistic value, but for its human value. It's a reminder that when we stop forcing people to choose one path, they can create something none of us ever imagined." After the meeting, he even proposed adding the painting to a new training module on art-based communication in medicine, an initiative I had never imagined could exist at Boston General. As for my mother, she visited my studio for the first time one rainy afternoon. She didn't bring flowers or gifts, just a clear umbrella and a small box of homemade apple pie. She stood by the shelf of canvases, gently touched an unfinished piece, then said, "Do you remember how I used to scold you for drawing on the walls? I scrubbed them all clean, but now I wish I had saved one." I froze. Her voice wasn't trembling nor soft. It was simply honest, a truth long overdue but no longer hidden. "I don't understand this world," she said, glancing over the scattered palettes, "but I'm learning. I just signed up for a beginner painting class at the community center." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I felt an impossible weight lift. For a moment, I felt like a child again, finally allowed to draw on the walls without getting scolded. Since then, things haven't been perfect. I'm still a doctor, still have exhausting days and sleepless shifts, but I also paint more publicly. And for the first time in my life, I'm no longer hiding who I am. The hospital opened a small gallery for artwork created by medical staff, with me as its curator. Doctors who once dismissed abstract art now try to express their emotions after tough ER nights. What moves me most is that every morning, after finishing his night shift, my father stops in front of the Woman of Two Worlds, hanging in the staff lounge, not to analyze the composition but just to stand there, as if he's quietly speaking to his daughter. Not the doctor, not the artist, but simply me. And I finally learned how to forgive. Not because they fully understood me, but because they were trying. And sometimes, trying to see each other with new eyes is the truest way to love. Within just a few weeks after the MoMA exhibition, everything changed so quickly I could barely catch my breath. My name, both names, appeared across every headline, from prestigious art magazines to top medical journals. Celeste Gray is Susan Hartley, the doctor who paints emotions, pulse, when anatomy meets art, the story of a heart that refused to be split. Not just the art world, but the medical community started speaking up too. Medical schools in California, Illinois, and even Harvard Medical invited me to speak at conferences on the topic of bridging emotion and expertise, a concept once seen as vague now sparked passionate conversations everywhere. Boston General officially launched the art therapy program for inpatients and medical staff, with me as the director. What started as a small experiment soon drew in hundreds of participants. Painting sessions after shifts became a space where doctors, nurses, and techs could release exhaustion through color and form, not charts and diagnoses. One day, I saw Dr. Michael Simmons, the former chief of internal medicine, known for his strictness, quietly blending oil pastels beside a terminal cancer patient. No words were spoken, but I knew something had changed, not in my position, but in how people had begun to understand what healing truly meant. My Brooklyn studio, once my hiding place, became an open space for weekend classes where I taught young patients how to express their inner world through brushes. The first painting hung on the classroom wall was by a 7-year-old girl. Her heart wasn't red but purple, surrounded by tiny golden dots. She called it a heart that shines in the dark. I can't count how many times I've choked up looking at things like that, because to me, that is the purest form of art. Not fame, not auctions, just honesty. From someone who once lived a double life, I now live one life fully. Every morning, I walk into the hospital carrying my worn leather bag with both a stethoscope and a sketchbook inside. My white coat now bears a new name tag, Dr. Susan Hartley, Celeste Gray. There's nothing left to hide. Breathing between the pauses is now protected by UV glass, proudly displayed in the hospital's main lobby. Below it is a small brass plaque, engraved in 2 fonts, one formal, one graceful, Dr. Susan Hartley, Celeste Gray, where medicine and art meet, where the heart doesn't just beat but feels. Every time I walk past it, I see patients stop to read. Some smile, some touch the glass, some turn to their children and say, "She's Mommy's doctor." And every time, I know stepping into the light that night was the best decision I ever made. One early autumn afternoon, I was invited back to Middleton Medical School, the place where I once buried my true self for years, to give a speech at the opening ceremony. I stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of students, most just 18 or 19, full of hope but also confusion, just like I once was. "I used to think success only came when you wore the white coat," I said, my voice echoing through the hall. "But now I understand true success comes when you no longer have to choose between the different parts of yourself." The room went silent. Then long applause erupted. Not because I was a doctor, not exactly because I was an artist, but because I was someone who dared to live honestly. After the ceremony, a young female student approached me hesitantly. "Do you think it's possible to study medicine and still write poetry?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I looked at her and remembered myself 10 years ago, holding an acceptance letter to art school, voice trembling under my parents' cold stares. "Not only is it possible," I smiled, "sometimes it's the very thing that makes you a great doctor." That night, when I got home, I opened the door to my studio. A fresh canvas waited on the easel, bathed in soft yellow light. I placed my hand on a brush and began to paint, not as Celeste Gray, not as a hidden persona, but as me, Susan Hartley, someone who no longer feared living in full color. From a girl once paralyzed by the fear of rejection for not choosing the path others had set, I've learned that true worth isn't in pleasing anyone, it's in daring to be true to yourself. Today, I no longer choose between medicine and art. I am both. My story isn't just about success, it's about freedom. Freedom to heal, to create, and to become my whole self without asking for permission.